Hi everyone, it's Max Forsyth here, your host and founder of the Comms Coffee Club podcast and Comms Search and Selection, the executive search and recruitment firm covering the in-house market based in the UK, but also covering the US. So welcome to episode 8 of the Comms Coffee Club podcast with the great James Banks, who's the current head of marketing and communications for the infrastructure business AECOM. It's a great episode. We chat all things infrastructure comms, right through to his time previously as a journalist and a freelance journalist, war correspondent as well. But prior to that, he was a captain in the British Army and fought out in Afghanistan. And we also discussed the time where he was in charge of hosting an ITV news crew who went out on patrol with them and what that was like looking after them. They also got caught in a crossfire and engagement with the Taliban. So that was great, speaking about that and what that was like, trying to be a soldier, but also very aware that you have a journalist with you. So really looking forward to this one. Hope you like it. Once again, don't forget to like, subscribe and follow on YouTube and whichever podcast app you choose to listen to this on. And look forward to your comments. And here is Mr. James Banks. So, James Banks, welcome to the Comms Coffee Club podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Max.
No worries, pleasure. How's your week been?
It's been busy. It's always busy at AECOM. It's always challenging and rewarding at the same time, obviously, is what I'm going to say.
Nice, super. And obviously, it's Friday when we're recording this, so nearly the weekend.
Almost there. Final push. Although now that we've all embracing this, hybrid working, and we're all trying to be in the office, sort of flatten the curve and make sure that we are there on Mondays and Fridays. But today I am at home. But I always found when we were in the office Monday to Friday, that Friday afternoons were always the foot came off the gas a little bit, and okay, I might leave a bit early, etc. Whereas now I find Friday afternoons are sometimes the busiest part of my week, in that kind of mad dash to get stuff done before I actually hit the weekend. So it's a different take on Friday.
Well, kind of changing world and changing ways of working. It's it's been an interesting few years. Right, super. Should we get into it? So, first question, which I always start with, let's wind the clock back. How did you get into communications?
Okay, so I was a journalist. I was a broadcast journalist. I worked for freelance for a number of different organisations, different broadcasters, from British Forces Broadcasting, Sky News, ITV News. I did a bit of time at London Live as well, and various others as well along the road. And I would say that journalism is the second of my three careers, and we can perhaps touch on the first one later on. But I was a journalist, absolutely loving journalism, doing a lot of work. As I say, Sky and ITV were probably the two key broadcasters that I worked for. Really, really busy, really challenging, huge variety of stories that I was covering. And then I got to my mid-30s, and to be honest, I thought, right, I need a career that I can invest in a little bit more.
Yes.
And a career that I can see some more structure, and something I feel like I've got a bit more control over. And so I took the decision to change and to move into the world of comms, which was, I suppose it wasn't, I think a lot of journalists are probably, and I was very guilty of that, think that they're going to walk out of a job as a TV reporter and straight into something that's going to really set their world on fire in comms. And some people do. And, I was pretty lucky to find a job pretty quickly, but it wasn't as quick as I expected. And it was challenging, and it was a very, very steep learning curve, and very, very interesting being thrown onto the other side of the phone line or the other side of the camera, and having to learn quickly. And there was a lot of naivety for me, definitely, being a journalist and understanding how organizations communicate and what they should be doing, and then suddenly being on the other side and going, okay, right, okay. I get it now. So I was a journalist, like many other people who work in communications, and I made the jump in my mid-30s, which was 8 years ago now. So it's been a while. It's been a while.
Yeah. And what would you say the biggest difference was, or that sort of learning curve you reference? Yeah, what was the biggest shock to you when you jumped over the other side?
I suppose it was often it's the internal politics of communications, and just thinking about all the other impacts of what you might say or might do externally. I think that was probably the biggest part of it for me, was that really kind of thinking, okay, well, this isn't just about the story on the day for this organization. It's a story that's going to run and run. And it's a story that's going to impact other clients. It's a story that's going to impact other projects. And so there's lots of other things going on in the background. And, people have got very busy lives. And whilst
Yes.
as a communicator, I would always think that that's the most important thing. And it's the most thing that everyone should think about as soon as they step out of bed in the morning. But actually, there are lots of things going on. So to find people's time and to get the right person and get the right person briefed as well. I think that was a level of naivety I had, was that surely every leader in every organization is completely up to speed on everything that could potentially be going wrong or right for an organization. And so therefore can, at the drop of a hat, come and speak to ITV London about what's going on, or Sky News about what's going on.
Yes.
Okay, that is extremely naive of me, I admit that. So understanding, well, okay, there needs to be work done in the background. There needs to be people briefed, not necessarily because it's a negative story, just about making sure that the right messages are in play, and actually that every time an organization communicates externally, that they're using that to the full advantage. They're thinking about the key messages, they're thinking about the wider impact, and they're thinking about how they can make the most out of that situation. It was
Yes.
it was a steep learning curve, but I really enjoyed the transition.
Although I'm imagining, in terms of briefing people internally, with your journalist hat on, I guess you'll recognize and know that you'll book them to talk about one thing. And of course, most of the interview will be about that. But you have to make sure you've covered off anything else that could potentially be asked that might be a little bit more tricky.
Yeah, exactly. And I found that the credentials that I had and the fact that I'd been on the other side was tremendously useful. When you would talk to anybody within an organization and say, look, this is potentially what you might get asked, this is potentially what might happen. And if somebody then come back and say, well, I don't think that's the case, James, I'd say, well, I can tell you that's exactly what I would do. And within the first few months of changing over, you could say, well, that's what I was doing 2 weeks ago. So that did help, certainly give me some gravitas and get me some impact with key internal stakeholders. But at the same time, trying to get people not to be too afraid of it as well, and just thinking, actually, well, if some of these stories, if you look at negative stories, it's not going away. So we've got to use this, and sometimes we're crying out in-house for people to be looking at us and asking us questions and putting us on TV or whatever. We're crying out for that attention. Yes. And so therefore, if there is an opportunity and there is something we can do, that there are various negative stories and there are some that you aren't going to be using as an opportunity, but how can you turn that opportunity around, and how can you turn what perhaps potentially was a slightly negative approach from a journalist and turn it around into a more positive story for you as an organization?
Yes. And your first in-house gig, that Network Rail, wasn't it?
It was a Network Rail. Yes. Yeah. And I just touched on it then. The fact was that, I was working at ITV London beforehand, and I'd done quite a few stories
on Network Rail.
Then they weren't funnily enough, weren't a lot of them weren't very positive.
Yes.
And so I was able to say, and actually I ended up, one of the first campaigns I worked on, I ended up kind of saying that, like 2 weeks ago, I was doing a story from the other side, and I don't think you handled it very well. And that's why the stories come back, and it will continue to come back until you take it seriously. But there was also a very odd period when I got the job at Network Rail, and I was actually dispatched from ITV London to go do a story about Network Rail, which was quite odd. But I had to sort of fully declare, what story is this? Because I'm going to go and work there. So can we just be clear?
Yeah.
It was a positive story that time around. So that was okay. Yeah.
No, but I think, also that's one of those gigs. I think, you do have some sympathy with Network Rail. I think it's one of those where, yeah, certainly for someone like an ITV London, it's either rail strikes or engineering works over bank holidays,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's never kind of that's never the easiest brief to be sort of walked out and trotted out in front of the camera for. So
No, it's not. It's not. I mean, I only worked for Network Rail. I was only there for about 6 months, but I talk about it a hell of a lot. I talk a lot. The work that I did there and the lessons I learned. I had to learn really quickly.
mm,
Going straight into a really busy press office that, gosh, yeah, the phones are ringing nonstop, and having to deal with things. And again, that's the kind of, okay, going behind the scenes and suddenly finding yourself as I was media relations manager there. Suddenly find yourself as the fairly junior member of staff having
mm,
conversations with the managing directors of various routes, or the project managers, or the project directors, about really significant things that are going on. And often you were left in the room to have that conversation because you were kind of the most briefed up person. So suddenly you're like, okay,
yes,
well, my job is far more in depth than just being the guy that writes a press release and picks up the phone and pushes out the lines to take. It's
yes,
far more about the internal aspect,
mm,
getting people together, getting people organized, getting them aligned, getting to the facts behind what the story is, and then
yes,
shaping the messaging around that. Um,
yeah, yes. Well, and also I guess very heavily unionized environment as well. So you've then
yeah,
got that added element
yeah,
to consider
yeah.
as well.
And I think you learn very quickly, and you still talk about this now at AECOM, and I was talking about this with someone the other day about some internal communications that we're issuing, and saying, look, the point is that I really, really, what I ask of the senior leadership is, when you're speaking to my comms teams, don't tell them what you think they should be told, because that's what you think the comms should be. Tell them the
Mm,
truth. Tell them what the facts are. They're the comms
yes,
professionals. They will work out the messaging based on the facts. Don't skip a few steps and tell them what you think is what we should communicate, because we'll miss things. You need to
yes,
establish that really high level of trust. And I got some great
mm,
feedback about one of my team the other day from one of our senior leaders saying, I really, really like working with this person, because they really push back and they really kept
nice,
questioning. No, 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 no. Don't, exactly how I said, don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Tell me what's the actual story. What are
mm,
we actually trying to do here?
yes.
What are the pain points? What's the good news? Give me the the
Give
warts
me
and
the
all.
full lay of the land.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Trust me to then create the messaging around it. And the results that we see when that happens are far, far better than when somebody is, the usual. I mean, we all talk about this. Don't bring comms in at the late stage. It's that thing, isn't it? Well, we've figured it all out. Let's just
yes.
get comms in to send out an email or whatever it is, and that's just a disaster waiting to happen.
Well, yeah, quite. And I think also particularly nowadays where um, yeah, investigative journalism in inverted commas, I guess you don't even need to be an investigative journalist now with Google, social media, etc. Any decent journo can go digging, and
Yeah,
if you haven't been fully open and honest with your comms team, you
yeah.
can't go running to them and blaming them
No,
when you
exactly,
when you
exactly.
go out with one statement and then turns out that maybe that's not quite the whole truth. Um,
Yeah, and
yeah.
also look, for working, like, the company I work for now, AECOM, it's a global infrastructure consultancy.
Mm,
We've got lots of, it's the classic matrixed organization. So there are lots and lots of different agendas internally. And if you don't get to the bare bones of something, then you can't understand what the impact might be on other parts of the business. So again,
mm,
and we found, when we find this constantly, that the marketing and comms team, which is the team that I lead, so not just within communications, they've got a much bigger role than just that influence piece externally or internally.
mm,
There's a lot about bringing people together, bringing the various people who are involved in whatever project it is or whatever internal change project it is, really bring them together and getting them to understand what the strategy is and what we need to be doing to ensure that we are communicating to whichever key audience is in mind.
mm, mm,
So
mm,
I always, the people that do well in my team are those that realize that they've got a really significant role to play in bringing people together internally and pushing back and asking the right questions and having the confidence in their own ability to shape those communications.
mm. yeah, that pushing back thing, I think, yeah, really important, but also particularly for anyone at manager level who listens to this, probably the number one takeaway actually will be, yeah, don't be afraid to push back and don't be afraid to ask questions and don't be afraid to, you know, challenge a senior person. I know sometimes it can feel a little bit intimidating when you're not that experienced, but actually most of the good ones, they like it.
Of course, and look, that's the thing. It's not about being, of course, it's not about being disrespectful. It's just actually really interrogating that
Mm,
conversation and saying, right, okay, so what are we doing here? So what does good look like? What? Let's talk. Go back to the very start. What's the problem? What are we doing? Or what's this? What's going well? But ultimately, what does success look like? And what are we trying to achieve here? Everything that
mm,
we do within the marketing comms team at AECOM is about supporting, well, not everything. Well, yeah, everything is. It's about supporting growth of the business, and that includes our internal communications and ensuring that employee advocacy is in place. That we're
mm,
inspiring our colleagues to stay and work at AECOM. We're recruiting the next generation of colleagues to come in, but we're also letting our
mm,
clients know what we can bring and how we can offer the solutions that are going to answer their most complex challenges.
mm.
So having those serious conversations with the business to say, look, we're not here just to put a banner up or put out a press release or put out a
Mm.
do we put out an X now, or is it still putting out a tweet on X? I don't know, but that shows where I'm at.
Uh, what does Elon call it? I think he calls it an a post.
A
A
post on
post
X.
on X,
Okay.
yeah. Yes,
So
an
we're
X
not here
post.
just to put out a
Yeah.
post on X or a post on LinkedIn. We're here
Yes.
to support where the business is going. So tell us about what your strategy is, and if your strategy is not in place, let us help you build that strategy, and then we can work out on the
Mm.
campaigns that are going to support that and ensure that ultimately we're winning more work, and we've
Yes.
a fully trained and happy workforce to deliver that work.
Mm. Mm.
So I think again, it's that having those honest conversations and getting people to understand and push back to say, this is not a now let's just get comms involved. This is about we need to be front and center. We need to be at the very
Mm.
heart of everything that you do to ensure that we are influencing the right people and we are uh,
Mm.
impacting those decisions and making sure those
Yes.
decisions go our way.
Yeah. No, yeah, kind of great points and yeah, strategy, planning, communications, it's all interlinked. It's probably a it's probably a very nice segue actually to go right back to the start to your first career that you
Mm.
mentioned in the British Army as an officer, where of
Yeah,
course strategy, planning,
don't ask me to talk
and
about
communications
by me. Um, yeah, no,
are are integral. Yeah.
yeah, they are, and look, yeah. So by background, my first career, I was in the army. I was an officer in the Royal Artillery. Um,
Mm.
so nothing to do with, well, no, you're going to pick me up on this. I'm saying nothing to do with communications. I had a lot to do with
Yeah,
communications,
yeah, yeah.
but
But
if you
obviously
look
the
at my
core job was
role
yeah,
in the day to day, it
yes.
wasn't in a comms sense.
Yeah, of course.
It was certainly in influence. Being a forward observer in the artillery is certainly part of an influence strategy, but it's at the very kinetic end of influence.
Yes.
Um, and I left at 30 and decided I wanted to go and become a journalist, and that the story you've heard earlier on about how that unfolded.
Mm.
And I think at the time when I first left, I didn't really think I probably had any transferable skills to go into communications. Um, everyone else I knew who was leaving was off to do sort of the kind of the standard things that people tend to do when they leave the army. Going
Which is
into
go and work for a defense contractor.
well, there's some of that, but going
Yeah.
into project management, going
Yeah.
directly into the city,
Mhm.
kind of more obvious resettlement options.
Mm.
And I sort of at 30 didn't have any responsibility, didn't have a mortgage, and thought, what would I really love to do next? What would be my number two dream career? And it was, I'd love to be a broadcast journalist. And ultimately, I'd love to, I remember having the conversation in Afghanistan, what does success look like for me? Well, it looks like coming back here to Helmand, to Afghanistan, and as a journalist, which
Oh,
I'm very
nice.
proud that I managed to do. So
Did
it
something inspire you to do that? Had you seen something? Had you just been watching, kind of British Forces news whilst you're out there or?
well, so I'd so if we go way back, when I was at school, I did two things of work experience. I did a work experience within the army.
Yep.
I did work experience at the local newspaper at the Shropshire Star. There we are.
Nice.
And the two were always kind of. I was very interested in both of them, and the army won out at that time. So I ended up going to Sandhurst and doing the army thing. Great.
Yeah.
But then when I was, as I said, I had no responsibilities. I was like, right, I have no idea what I want to do. I can't see myself going and doing what everyone else is doing when I leave the army. I'd been in the army at a very busy time, done a tour of Iraq, 2 tours of Afghanistan, and thought, right, I need to go and do something else. And I kind of started thinking about journalism again, thinking about that week at the Shropshire Star when I was 14 or whatever, and thought, I'm not quite sure that's what I want to do, but I really like the idea of being, and I know it's corny to say it, the first draft of history, being where things are happening, being involved, interviewing really interesting people, telling stories and really communicating. And I met quite a few journalists when I was in Afghanistan in my final tour in 2009. And I got chatting to them, a lot of them, and went, look, hey, I've got this kind of crazy idea that I might want to become a TV reporter ultimately.
Yeah.
One of the guys that we had ITV News embedded with us on one of the big main missions of that summer. And one of their correspondents, a guy called Geraint Vincent, was with me with a company, 3 Scots. And I just said, look, when I get back to London, can I come and have a chat? Can I come and spend a couple of days at ITV? And the rest is sort of history, really.
Yeah. And you say embedded, was he coming out on patrol with you?
Yeah. I mean, I was at, he was.
Yeah.
I'll send you the link sometime. It's the report's still on YouTube somewhere. But he spent about a week with us on an operation called Panchai Palang, or Panther's Claw, as it was named, which was the main push of the summer 2009. And I mean, he was on a rooftop with me when we were getting shot at, and
wow,
he did a piece to camera for News at 10 with me calling in artillery fire just in front of him. So he was definitely embedded with us out on.
Wow, and what was that? I want to know, because what that's like. Because obviously you're clearly focused on your actual job, which is the army bit, and the fighting bit, right? But then you're probably also conscious that you've got a civilian journalist lying on a rooftop next to you that you're trying not to get killed.
Yeah, and
what's that like? Yeah,
well, it's. I mean, we had quite a lot of pressures on that tour, so by that point, I think we were quite used to it. But you're very aware that everything you're doing is, well, it's going on News at 10 that night. So
yes,
you kind of have to have an extra sort of eye out, which actually helped me really late in my career, the next career, when I would meet soldiers on the ground. Say, look, I'm a journalist. I've been there. I know that you're worried that I'm going to find the story that you don't want me to find. And I know what you're concerned about, and that this is what I'm going to do to help you with this. And this is where we're going to try and be as honest as possible with each other. So that was a really, really interesting experience. But actually, there was a huge morale raising piece for the soldiers as well, knowing that parents were going to see what they were doing well, actually, I'm probably quite worried actually, but their parents are going to see what they were doing on TV that night. And I remember Geraint doing a live literally at the bottom of my bed space in this compound, and they had the voice back, whatever it's called, on a speaker, and I could hear Alistair Stewart and Mary Nightingale sort of saying, "We now go live to Geraint Vincent, who's in Helmand," and I'm there sort of lying in my on the floor.
It's
quite surreal.
Yeah,
it was great. So Geraint and Dave, his cameraman, were there, and they spent a couple of weeks with us. And then I was fortunate enough to obviously end up working back at ITV News and see them in the newsroom as colleagues later on in my career, which was fascinating. But yes, going back to the point, I mean, I saw the idea of going back to Helmand as a journalist, or go back to Afghanistan as a journalist, as a real key part of my journey. And actually, one of the very strange moments of that journey was in the same place where we were with Geraint and Dave, in Helmand, where I went back. I was there about 2 years later, maybe, and where we'd been in quite a vicious firefight there was now a thriving bazaar, and life was sort of returning back to
Wow.
normal. There was real stability,
Yes.
which was incredible. But I was also able to go to a compound that the Royal Engineers were rebuilding, and they were building it for an Afghan national police station, I think. And I sort of looked at this map, and this engineer sergeant, I think, went, "Oh, we're rebuilding it because the British artillery just destroyed it in a firefight a couple of years ago." And I'm pretty sure it was me that dropped the artillery on that compound. So to go back and really see that and go, actually, well, this is very strange being back here a couple of years later with a, now in a bright blue body armor, being somewhere where I was 2 years ago when it was a very, very different part for me. So that was a
Yes.
really, really interesting part of my career.
No, yeah, kind of really fascinating, and also, I think kind of poignant sort of point you make as well that not many people will be aware of is the, a lot of time and effort invested in the aftermath of, kind of the British Army going back and, sort of rebuilding a lot of that infrastructure for the better good, which probably a lot of people don't know about, and even actually, to be honest, until you mentioned it, I'd actually forgotten about it too. So,
yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think the point was that there was a reason why we had a pretty hectic hectic firefight there, was because it was a really strategic area. So once the stability had sort of returned, it needed to make sure that area was secure for the future.
Yes. Yeah, no, great. And and taking some of those lessons, sort of into your corporate career. Well, no, actually, no. Let's skip that bit. I think, I mean, I'd love to know actually what it was like, sort of on the British Forces journo side of things. So, yes, you went back out to Afghanistan. What
Yeah.
other, kind of gigs did you do there?
So I spent 3 months there working for British Forces Broadcasting, for their TV channel. So someone asked me about this the other day. Actually, it's very odd to be talking about this twice in the same week. But going back as a journalist was fascinating, because as a soldier, you're really focused on what you're doing in your area of operations. You're really focused on just your kind of mission, and you've got a bit of awareness, obviously, about the strategic piece, etc.
Yeah.
But going back as a journalist, suddenly you've got this really holistic view. And you're embedded with troops, and you're going out with the British, went out with the Americans, and with the Afghan army as well, and some of their female engagement teams, and all the different elements we went out with. And you're going to Kabul and meeting the ambassador and seeing it at a really kind of high level. And suddenly you see the bigger picture, which is really, really interesting. So I found that tremendously rewarding. But it was very odd being back, and some of my soldiers who I'd been there with in 2009 were back out again when I went there in 2011, 2012. So they were quite surprised to see me in my North Face gear as opposed to my uniform. So it was great.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed going back.
Yeah. And what did that feel like for you, sort of personally? Kind of walking around with a microphone instead of having an SA-80 in your hands. Did you feel? Did you feel less secure or a bit nervous at all? Or
Yeah, of course it is. Terrifying. Yeah. I mean, it's a weird feeling when you're getting shot at and you haven't got
anything to shoot back.
You haven't got a rifle to shoot back. I mean, I think I was one sort of sergeant major. I said, don't worry if it all goes horribly wrong. I can still remember how to use one of those, and he looked even more terrified than the fact there was a contact going on. I mean, it was weird. Yeah, it was very weird being there and just trying to film it all and not kind of obviously let everyone else sort of worry about what's going on.
And I guess you've also got the journalist bit of you as well. That I'm trying to think how to phrase this the best way. You want to capture the most newsworthy action, right? Which often means you have to get.
But also, I had to really remember that I wasn't a soldier anymore, and I had to listen to what obviously you've got to really listen to what these soldiers are saying around you. They're there to look after you. What they don't need is a rogue, retired army officer basically going, "Oh, don't worry, I'll be fine." So I had to sometimes be like, "Okay, remember where you are, James. Remember where you are." Yeah.
Yeah. No. Great. Super. So let's go back to corporate career, comms campaigns. what's been what's been your favourite comms campaign you've worked on, and why?
I've thought long and hard about this favourite campaign, and I think I'm going to refer back to, actually, this is quite strange to talk about, but probably one of the first things I did when I left, and it's back to that time in Network Rail, and it really refers to all the things that we talked about earlier in terms of jumping over the fence from journalism to comms, and being exposed to what's going on behind the scenes. And I was working in Network Rail, based in London, and we were one of the areas I had to look after was the kind of public perception of the redevelopment of London Bridge Station.
Yes.
And there'd been quite a lot of negative press. I think it was running over time. I'm sure it was probably running over budget. People were getting delayed because they were redeveloping it whilst keeping it open. And there was quite a sort of infamous photo of somebody jumping over the ticket barrier because the barriers hadn't worked or something. And every time the story came up again, this picture kept coming up. And the management, the leadership were getting quite annoyed about this. Why do they keep using this picture? We've explained what the problem is, blah, blah, blah. Don't they understand that it's a really complex build, and we're trying to keep the station open whilst redeveloping what is essentially a Victorian station? And every time we pull down one wall, we found the room that we weren't expecting to find, and we've got to mitigate against that. And we're trying to build a platform that's as long as the Shard is high and a concourse the size of Wembley football pitch, but they just don't understand. They just keep sending them this picture. And I said, well, I didn't know any of that. Like, what have you thought about telling people that? And they're like, well, it's on the website. Oh, yeah, but no. Yeah. Have you thought about really focusing on that? Well, yeah, but every time there's some delays, we just get a journalist standing at the front, doing a live, saying how bad we are. And I said, well, but you never put anyone forward, do you? Never put anyone to speak to that journalist. And they said, well, no, because they're just going to twist our words, sort of thing. And I went, well, look, that story's not going to go away.
Yeah, and you're just going to continue to be a punch bag.
Yeah, and I said, look, they'll just send a reporter to go and stand outside London Bridge, and do you know who they'll interview? They'll interview really angry commuters who are delayed. Well, they might not. I went, look, I did it 2 weeks ago. I was the reporter that was stood there voxing really annoyed commuters because there was no one else to talk to. And my news editor is not saying, my news editor is saying, James, you've got 2 minutes to fill tonight on the 6 o'clock news. If in the absence of anything good, I'm going to just be talking to the annoyed people. So I said, well, look, let's bring a journalist in and let's show them how complicated this project is. And there was a sort of, God, what a gasp. And I said, look, this is really interesting. And I've had to walk around London Bridge Station. I was still taking behind the hoardings and showing it all, and said, look, this is the problems. We find these arches, and we find. I said, look, a journalist would love to know all this. Love to know.
Yes.
So we got someone in. We got a guy called Luke Hanrahan came in from ITV London, who he was working for at the time, and gave him kind of a real walk around. And the result was this great package that went on the news that was, do you know what? I think that photo was shown again of them jumping over the barriers. But it was then explained and said, look, do you know what? People are annoyed. People want this, but this is what they're trying to achieve. And these are some of the challenges they're coming up against. And whilst I don't think that, and equally, this is not a campaign, this is just a kind of one day in the office. Whilst I don't think that completely turned around the public perception of London Bridge, I would be boasting if I said that was the case. I do think it started to change public perceptions, and it started to change internal perceptions as well about how we should be working more closely with the media and how we should be being a bit more open and transparent in terms of the challenges that we were facing. Because when you're doing major infrastructure projects, it is going to impact people's lives. Of course it is. But ultimately, you're trying to do something that's going to improve people's lives, create better opportunities for people. So that was one of my favorites. I think it was because it was so quick after leaving. And the fact that I'd been on both sides, literally been on both sides of the story, was really, really interesting for me to be a part of.
Yeah, and you make a really good point around the, I know you said that, that one piece may not have completely swung the public perception, but what a lot of people also don't necessarily realise doesn't necessarily have to overtly swing the public perception just off that. But if you've then shown the media the actual challenges, shown them around, they understand it, suddenly their lines of questioning become a little softer, a little bit more sympathetic, and then naturally that actually starts to change the public discourse anyway,
Yeah.
without having to actually do an onward campaign yourself. It's just the
And
future
actually,
questioning becomes softer. Yeah.
what it also did for ITV is give them some fresh pictures that aren't just that still that's taken off Twitter or whatever. It gives them some fresh pictures to show, right, this is, if we're talking about the work at London Bridge, we're not just going to show the pictures of people waiting to get in. We're going to show some pictures of what we've got of behind the scenes, behind the hoardings.
Yes.
So yeah, that was a really interesting one, and it was a real sort of gamble for me, thinking, I've really sort of said this is what we should be doing.
Yeah.
So I was very glad when it went down. It was quite well.
Yeah, it's such a huge thing for major infrastructure projects. I mean, I think about all the news coverage around HS2, etc., and all the video and the photo content and the stuff that lands well, is all video and stills of the tunneling machines. Massive, big beasts that most people haven't seen before ever.
Yeah,
and it's interesting, right? But you have to, you have to let the media in behind the scenes, and I know that can be very scary for a lot of operational people.
Yeah, it's like everything. I talk a lot at work about the risk versus reward, and everything. There's always a risk with everything you do. As soon as you open the doors or you go out externally, there's always a risk, but you always have to look at that kind of risk versus reward calculation and think, okay, well, the risks, how are we planning against them? How can we mitigate those risks? What are the awkward questions they could ask, and how do we make sure we're prepared for it? But the reward is greater. But I mean, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we sit down and go, and I have these conversations with my press team quite often, and go, risk versus reward on this one. Risk outweighs it. Okay, well, let's not do it. Why not? Okay, because of this. Well, let's bear that in mind in future, so that if something else does come up that's similar, that we might be able to be more happier doing it. So, yeah.
I think as long as you've got your ducks in a row and everyone's been open and you've covered all of your bases, you can be fairly confident that most things shouldn't land too badly.
No. Yeah, I'm not saying that. Yeah, I think most of the time we it's just about doing your job. Often just about doing your job properly, and again making sure that comms are involved early on, and we understand what if there are any skeletons, if there are any things that we should be worried about, that comms are trusted to be briefed on that, and they can prepare for it.
And what about your time at AECOM? You've been there. How long have you been at AECOM now? Good
6.5 years. Yeah, time has flown.
Yeah, what's been your favourite campaign at AECOM? Because you must have worked on quite a few over the years.
Gosh, I have. I mean, there's some really interesting things that we've done at AECOM, and I joined AECOM 6.5 years ago, and I originally joined as the head of media relations, and then sort of transitioned to sort of more of a role of external relations, and then took over the marketing and communications team about 2.5 years ago. There were some really interesting ones. I mean, I think one of my favourites is probably around the natural thing called the Natural Capital Laboratory.
Natural Capital Laboratory.
Natural Capital Laboratory.
Okay.
Google,
yeah.
Loads of stuff. It's basically, and I'm going to get this wrong now. It's an area of land that we have been loaned essentially on the edge of Loch Ness in the Highlands.
Okay.
We're working with a couple of other partners. I think it's the Lifescape project and the landowners as well, to have an area where we can really sort of play around with the concept of biodiversity, about natural capital, look at options. How can we use digital tools to understand the value of our natural capital? So how can we use AI? How can we use drones? How can we use eDNA sampling to find out the animals that once lived there? And how can we sort of start to transform it and think, well, if we really invested in this in the future, what would it look like and what would be the benefits? Because all of our clients have obviously got huge amounts of land. And often there's an element of, well, what should we be doing with it? How should we be treating it? What is the value of that land? Capital Laboratory really allows us to look at that. And this is one of those stories that started off as an off-the-cuff conversation, as some of the best campaigns always do.
Yes.
where you're talking to someone about one thing and they're saying, oh, and I've got to go up to Scotland from the Natural Capital Laboratory next week, so I won't be around to that interview about something that was far more boring. And you're, sorry, what was that? What's the Natural Capital Laboratory? Oh, it's this thing we're doing. And you're like, right, that sounds really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know about it, and I'm like, oh, okay, tell me more. Yeah,
I can't believe you didn't know about it, Max. So we formed a campaign around it. On my very own in-house podcast, Talking Infrastructure.
Yeah.
There's an episode there about the Natural Capital Laboratory. We had journalists going up there. We had the marketing team supporting it as well, and it sort of culminated in BBC Countryfile going up there and basically spending a whole episode looking at the Natural Capital Laboratory.
Wow.
And it's been a really, really, and everyone comes back to it. It's always one that people come back to in terms of Natural Capital Laboratory, AECOM's Natural Capital Laboratory, and it's been a real joy to work on. And we managed to win. I think we won an award on an ESG PR award around it. But it's been a really great one. Not only just the way that we've seen it externally, and it's gone from in-house podcast, trade magazines. It's been mentioned in the press. It's been on one of the biggest, highest watch shows on the BBC. But also, we know that people are talking about it. Our clients talking about it, and internally, it was great for sharing that corporate knowledge about what's really quite a small project, but something that's really opening doors and starting conversations with clients about the innovative ways that AECOM are looking at natural capital. So that's been a really interesting one.
Genuinely fascinating. Yeah,
I'm
going to have to check out loads more about it. Yeah.
And the other one, which I won't go into the same detail, but I managed to get our autonomous vehicles project on the Apprentice a couple of years ago, when there was an episode of the Apprentice on the candidates having to design an autonomous vehicle for the future. And I was able for AECOM's autonomous pod vehicle, we work with a company called Westfield Cars. I was able to get that as the project. So we had Karen Brady and all of the Apprentice candidates in our office in London designing these pods. That was fascinating.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, the autonomous vehicle sector is kind of very interesting. I'm going to get the company wrong here, but I think kind of the stories of whichever company it was doing the trials in San Francisco a month or two ago were slightly alarming, slightly amusing.
Yeah, I mean, again, actually, look, I wasn't going to talk about it, but the autonomous vehicles campaign, again, the Apprentice was a result of all the other media relations and Marcoms activities that we'd done around it. You talk about risk versus reward. We did lives with Sky News in Bristol when we had the autonomous vehicles being trialled around the Cribs Causeway shopping centre, and I had a Sky News reporter saying, if I step in front of it, it'll stop, won't it? And of course it will. Of course it will. And then watched him step in front of it on live television, and there was a moment of like, okay,
I really hope it does stop. Yeah,
it did stop. But that was really good. AECOM is a huge organisation. We do lots and lots of different things, but those are two projects that, they're really important for us, but they're probably not what we're known for. So they've been great to really push the boundaries in terms of our clients understanding some of the innovative projects that we're working on, and understanding how the autonomous vehicles project for us, for example, wasn't about developing autonomous vehicles. It was about understanding what are the impacts of autonomous vehicles on the built environment. So what are the secondary and tertiary impacts and how do you bridge that idea? You've got the manufacturers who can make autonomous vehicles. You've got perhaps a local authority that really wants to have autonomous vehicles buzzing around their city centre. But how do you make that connection? How do you bring everyone together? And that's the gap that AECOM are able to plug. So it's that bridging is corny, but we also it's bridging that ambition to action. And so those kind of projects have really helped us to bring that story to life.
The innovation piece is really interesting, and it's very much newsworthy and media worthy, and I think it's an important note for any large established organization. It's really important to keep innovating and don't stand still. Otherwise, you'll get overtaken by whichever up and coming company decides to come along. So,
but it's I talked about it earlier about understanding, how do we influence our clients? We listen to our clients and we understand that they want to work with innovative organizations. They want to see organizations that have got digital solutions driven through everything they're doing. And so therefore it's really important to us that when we spot something that really showcases what we're doing, that we get it in there. It's not just because it's a good story. The ruthless part of me is that's because I know that's what's going to win us more work. Our clients want to AECOM as an innovative, digitally driven organization. So therefore, that's when I find something that's going to show that off, I'm going to be all over it.
Yeah, no, nice, great, and a really nice couple of examples there. I like those a lot. Next question, which I always ask as well: who's been your favourite CEO you've worked for in terms of their comms?
I was hoping you weren't going to get around to asking me that question.
Okay, yeah.
Favourite? No.
Yeah.
I'm happy to answer it.
Yeah, go on.
Although, the next podcast will be how did your career end in communications? Is when you didn't say your current CEO was your favourite CEO. But anyway, we'll move on from that. No, look, I'm going to go for and she still works for AECOM, so I have to be quite careful here. Not necessarily because she was the best communicator, but because of the way that she really listened. So she still, this is good. Yeah, she is a lady called Lara Poloni, who was our chief executive for Europe when I was doing the head of media relations job.
Yes,
and she came over. She'd been working for AECOM for a long time, and been working in Australia, and came to Europe to take over the region. And she was really open to my advice. Yes. Really keen to learn, really keen to be told and put on the spot and say, no, you need to be doing that better. You need to be more outgoing. You need to be relaxed. There was none of this. Yes. I'm executive, James, and you're just the comms guy. It was like, James, help me out here. What do I do?
Right.
And, we got her on various, got her in some various broadcast opportunities, again, Sky, I think ITV as well. I think she might have been on as well. And as well as the sort of building press that we expected. And it freed up time for me. So for example, when we were preparing to get her on more broadcast, we went and rented out a studio in London. In fact, it was the London Live studio, which is in part of the Evening Standard building. And we rented it out for the afternoon. And I went and pretended to be a journalist again. And I just put her on various, on the sofa or at the desk and just interviewed her, grilled her. And then we went through feedback and went, look, this is Lara. This, you should be answering this better. You should be doing this better.
Great.
And it was great. It was great. And she's now our global president. So I still have to be very careful what I say. But I really enjoyed working with her.
No, it's fantastic.
She was so open to it. And then the pandemic happened and I didn't work with her as much as perhaps I would have liked to. But I really like that. And I think that for me is what makes the start of a good relationship with a leader is them really understanding that there's a real value that the comms professionals can add. And often those leaders, and my current chief executive, Colin, is a good communicator. I should get that in. And they've got there because they can communicate, because communication is a really important part of leadership. And it's not just communicating outwards, listening as well. Yes. It's a really important two-way process. So they've tend to often have a pretty good base on things, and they know how to deliver a sound in front of a room with people, and know how to do that. But there are more that we can do. And so to have a leader who, with that level of seniority, who's really open to speaking to me and really open to listening and learning from me was really great.
No, that's great. And I think, the openness, the willingness, also, I get the impression constantly likes to learn as well, and very open on that. And that probably explains why she's now got the promotion she has. And
look, I would always say our leaders could be better communicators, because otherwise I'd be out of a job. But it's great to see somebody that is happy to do that and is humble enough to say, come in and go, right, okay, how can I be better? How can I be better at that? But I think that's a really important, going off the comms thing, I think that's a really important part of leadership, is being happy to be challenged, to be happy to be told that you can improve, and that not having people in the room that are always going to tell you how great you are, but being happy to have people in the room who are going to say, I disagree with you. And I see people developing as leaders, and the moment that they're happy to be challenged, like, that's an important step for you, because now you can understand that you can use the expertise around you to make better decisions, make better outcomes. and it's not all about being the person that's right all the time.
Yes.
So I think, and that's where I think comms is a much bigger piece in terms of strategy and just in terms of leadership, and that's such an important part of any organization.
Yeah, so important for CEOs to really embrace that comms council. You're right. Yeah, it's not just the external piece; it's the internal piece as well. Getting that buy-in amongst everybody, and also I think particularly the way that kind of ways of working have changed. Even if you look at things like sort of media relations over the last 10 years, and how a lot of that has changed, and how much social media now is so prevalent, and CEOs almost need to be able to do little sort of vox pieces to camera. They never
Yeah,
had to do that 10, 15
yeah,
years ago.
that's
Yeah,
it.
it's,
And
it's quite a different skill.
I
Yeah.
better sing my current boss's praises a little bit here. But Colin, who
Mm,
is my current chief executive for Europe and India, I should say. Yeah, he's great now at being able to pick up a phone or do it on Teams, doing a quick message, and you see it land so well with people. The
mm.
traditional just we're going to write a start of year message, and it's going to be okay. We had a great year. Off we go. Blah 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 blah. Great. Okay. If nothing else, it's better than nothing. But the fact is that now he's become very very confident in suddenly doing a quick piece to camera,
Yes.
and that's
Yeah.
great.
And
That's
yeah,
what people
and yeah,
should do. Yeah.
and a lot more regularly as well. I think.
Yeah.
A lot of employees. Maybe it's a generational thing, but I think everyone under 30, they want that. They really desire that visible leadership on a
Completely.
regular basis.
Completely. And look, actually, I think this is one thing that the pandemic has really done for us in terms of not only our ability to use technology like we're talking right now, and we're all a lot more
Mm,
adept with it, but also I think we're all a lot happy with things being a little bit more rough and ready.
mm,
When it comes
mm.
to for video content, for example,
Yes.
pre-pandemic, if we were going to get our chief executive to do a video, it would be right. Get the lights in, get the camera in, and that still does happen. That still does happen.
Yeah.
Actually, let's just get him to record something on Teams, or let's just get they've all got phones. Can we just record a quick message? And I
Yes.
think we see that on television as well. The fact is that
Mm,
when I was a reporter, you had to be in the studio or you had to be in front of camera. Now, well, actually, if there's a breaking story, why can't we go to their study at home or speak to them wherever they are? So I
yeah,
think
that's so true. Actually, yeah, you're right. Yeah, yeah,
we've all
yeah,
become a
yeah.
lot
The
more
amount.
interested to thinking things. Okay, well, that's what would you rather have? As I say, an email that's just written because
Mm,
you couldn't get a film crew in time to see Colin, or just
mm.
Colin going right. I've got 10 minutes. I'm going to get my phone out and I'm going to record something quickly, um, and off we go. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You're so right. Yeah, I mean, I think if anyone puts on a rolling, news channel now,
Mm.
I'd say way over half of interviews when they interview a guest are the guest like
Yeah.
this in their office.
Yeah. Completely.
Yeah,
We
and
used
they
to have
just
a
clip
debate
it up with
when.
a couple of like kind of headshots on the screen,
Yeah.
and yeah.
I mean, I think the days of when I was at I think probably when I was at Sky, as a very junior, I would sort of say taxi rank reporter, where I was often just sort of given a postcode and told get there and figure out the story
Mm,
when you arrive. But sometimes you would cover for the correspondent if it was a big breaking story. You'd cover for the correspondent because the correspondent was at home and they needed to wait for them to come in.
yes.
It'd be like, something pretty. I don't really know what I'm talking about, but okay, I'm basically just covering for them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, whereas now we'll just go to the person who's the best place to talk about it and do it at home. So
Mm,
yeah, it's changed. I think it's
yeah.
changed. I think it's changed for the good. And I think I've seen some pretty ropey and pretty poor quality interviews as well. So probably there is a bit of middle ground. But I do think
Yes.
it just means that we're all more relaxed about the way we communicate, and we're a lot more confident in our ability to communicate to people in ways that hopefully really connects and really helps to get our messages across to them.
Yeah, it lands a lot better, and actually, I think it's important one, particularly for any B2B companies. You're right. Yeah, I think there is a time and a place for the polished video, but
Mm,
actually, I think if you look at anything on LinkedIn, particularly where a corporate's put a video up, if it's too well shot, it's almost a bit. You know what I mean? It's actually a lot of people just prefer something a little bit more rough and ready now. You're so right. It's
I've got to be
yeah, it's
careful here,
interesting how it's all
otherwise
changed. Yeah.
Our leaders at AECOM will be like, right, we want the marketing comms team is running around with mobile phones filming everything. But it's
Yeah. Oh, well, and drone shots as well, and drone technology in the built environment as well. Great bits of kit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
No, super. Well, look, I'm conscious of time. Have you got anything you'd like to plug or any appearances? You've got coming up, James, at all?
I've been subtly drinking from my Talking Infrastructure mug here. So there we are.
Yes, Talking Infrastructure podcast, which I will plug. Yes,
plug the Talking Infrastructure podcast. Just in the process of launching our third series of it. And again, podcast, we found that we launched it back in 2019.
Yeah,
a variety of stories. And it's been really, really interesting way engaging with our teams and our clients. So we're just about to launch that third series. First couple of episodes coming out around hydrogen and one on a collaboration in the rail industry. But there's a few others coming up as well over the new year. But keep an eye out for that.
Nice, sounds interesting. Yeah, and I assume that's on all the Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
all the Apple, iTunes, Spotify, and we are actually recording it in a little studio just down the road from our office in Aldgate now. So we'll have video content as well. So that'll be up on YouTube. So, but we still have people dialed in. Don't worry, we're not just going to get everybody in the room. We still have people dialed in when it needs to be, rather than moving everybody around.
Smashing. Well, look, James, it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I've loved it.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Honestly, kind of some really good stuff in there, and I'll make sure I put sort of relevant links in to everything you've spoken about as well, because I think everyone will be very interested. So, kind of great to chat. Thanks for coming on, and I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Yeah, will do, Max. Thanks very much for your time.
Smashing. Cheers James.
Bye-bye.